welcome everybody to episode 77 of the Unchained Vodcast. I am Vellic, and with me I have Kriss and Brand once again.
Hello, hello.
Hey.
Today we're going to be talking about Overmind and the Dragon Web, or the Dragon's Web. Is it Dragon's Web or Dragon Web?
I think it's the Dragon's Web.
I think so. That's what I typed in the title, so I hope that's what it is.
I think...
And we're going to get into what those things are and, what they have to do with medieval combat and magical battles and siege and everything. So what I wanted to start off with is actually Overmind, because I don't think we're going to really have as long of a period to really talk about that, because it's interesting, but it's not... I don't know. We'll see.
It's something that's in every game.
There we go. Thank you.
But this is its own version of it for CU.
Yeah, it's not something like that seems revolutionary to discuss, but maybe it is. We'll get into it. So, Overmind. We're officially changing it to Overwatch. Overmind, in my mind, is, and as they've kind of described it, is essentially a program to run scripting and changes for the game of Camelot Unchained, doing a lot of things that are done in every game, affecting spawning of NPCs, displaying VFX, weather effects, which is not in the system at present, changing NPC behavior, applying RNG to some elements, applying some randomness, but it's doing it through an Excel file, so that non-coders, non-engineers can use it to make changes and things in the game. Some of the other developers who aren't, I guess, they're senior engineers can do some of these things. So, I guess my question for this is, how is this different?
The difference, from what it sounds like, is all comes down to that last part, the Excel element, that it's this mixture of simple script that utilizes the information being put into the Excel file to then translate to in-game changes without the need for server restarts, so that they can make these changes live in the middle of a fight or in the middle of whatever's happening without needing an engineer to come over, make the changes outside of the game world, and then upload it and reset the server to take those changes.
Well, I guess that's where I'm confused on it, because they kind of explain that, but then on the other hand, I'm like, but doesn't every game have scripts that run while the game is live and change things? I mean, that's how we have spawns. That's how we have NPCs that change from protection to attacking.
From what I understand is those are based on a static script that has been put in the client or on the server that is rigid. The spawns will always be at the determined rate, the determined locations.
Unless you tell it not to.
The problem is when you tell it not to, you have to reset the server so the server knows now not to do it.
Well, no,
which is why they do like weekly maintenance.
But
updates
can't
for every
they
MMO.
set scripts that say, if this, then they do this, and if this, then they do that? And isn't that just what this is going to be doing?
Sort of. There are probably a lot of if statements involved with it, but it still takes out the element of resetting the server, which even when you hard code it is what you have to do. This is less hard coded into the client.
Because I'm assuming they're not going to have an actual developer sitting there while we're playing and just changing things in the scripting. You
would think not. But
while we're going live, they've got a tiny team. I mean, no, for testing, I can understand that. For testing, they can go in and change things live, and maybe that's what they mean. Like, while they're doing tests, they can literally go in and live change. But I thought we already had that. That was like a thing. They can go in and they were talking about how they can go and change the servers and stuff while we're in testing to try out different things.
Changing the servers is different than what Overmind is trying to do, which controls quite literally everything and how they interact. But being able to change like how many guards spawn at this particular location and what they're supposed to be doing on the fly without a reset.
Yeah, I guess That's maybe where I'm confused about its purpose, and wondering if maybe a lot of what they've talked about it doing that's different has to do with the testing environment as opposed to like live gameplay. Because I'm trying to think about applying it to live gameplay, and it just seems like most of the things it can do, you would have something else already coded into the game and doing it anyway. You wouldn't be making live changes to the server code while people are playing the game. And I certainly would hope, even with this, you wouldn't be doing it live while people are playing the game, because then what if you break something?
It's not applying changes to the code technically. They change it in the Excel, maybe, for instance. The things that generate a Veil Storm, or the requirements to generate it, are too frequent, and Veil Storms are happening way too frequently. They can reduce a number in the Excel sheet to try to adjust that balance live so that the next set of storms don't come as frequently without doing a full reset on the server.
Well, I guess maybe that is...
Go ahead. They're trying to get rid of what any MMO player has experienced, which is balance patches.
That's what I was about to...
Yeah.
Smaller patches that happen between big content patches, that the devs have to turn the server off for like 1-2. I've had that. I've played the Division for like 2 weeks now, really regularly, and in 2 weeks they had 3 patches where one of them was an hour, another was an hour, and the third one they had to even delay it 3 hours total, just for balance patches, because there were some bugs in the settings for the NPC damage and things like that. So I suspect that's why they want to be able to do that without turning the server off. It's more smaller settings, not the hard-coded stuff that will have major changes, but it's more the smaller settings that impact the gameplay.
Yeah, I was about to say, I could see, like weekly patches. Every game has those like weekly Tuesday morning patches that crank out, and maybe this would help to minimize that. So there are certain updates that they don't have to do that for. They don't have to take the servers down. And as Zaylin just mentioned, you could have like world bosses. Obviously, this game doesn't really have like world bosses, but things that spawn like that and have certain triggers, and I guess they can update those a little bit more on the fly without having to take the servers down. So yeah, I guess that would make sense for at least some application for launch.
Yeah, and what I would think also, they were talking, I don't know if it's still in the works or not, if it's still in the plans or not. They were talking about story elements, like story-wise happening in the world, like a special world boss spawning somewhere, generating events for the players might be something that Overmind can do, and that might be something that
it certainly can do it from what they've described it should be doing.
And we've talked in the past about how we would love to have more of like actual server events and things that happen dynamically in the game. Actually, talking about the server updates thing, if that is a thing that Overmind could do, even if, again, it's not like every update, but some updates may not have to have server resets. I would like to see them kind of explicitly state that that's one of the things that it's intended to do, if that is the case, because I actually think that would be pretty good marketing for the game. I mean, to put out there and say, we have updates we can kind of run without having to always take the server down. Now, we can't guarantee that's not going to go down for like a weekly update, but whereas most MMOs have a guaranteed every Tuesday morning update, we don't necessarily have to do that. Though we know they have like the nightly the nightly award rewards update.
Which
and so that's
Overmind
actually
controls,
I was about to say that would be an interesting thing, is if Overmind makes it so that they don't have to do like a full shutdown and reset to hand out rewards, as we've kind of expected it they're going to have to do.
Yeah. Actually, I think it was the last 2 weeks in one of the streams, Mark was talking about what they're working on right now is updating Keep Lord programming within Overmind, whether that means the King's rewards and how that relates into it, or if it means something much smaller on an individual keep that people control. Not sure, but they were starting to work on NPC control specifically for a keep lord type thing,
And
which could relate to that.
my point was what Grimslag is saying. In Dark Age, and in from my experience, I didn't play Dark Age much, but I played EverQuest, and that was the same. Sometimes they would put updates that changes some settings, some powers, some spells, and that would get either overpowered or nerfed to the ground, and that would not get fixed for months because they couldn't just take the server down at that moment. They had to wait for to have a certain amount of content to put in the patch to actually justify turning the server off. With Overmind, you wouldn't need to do that because the spell effects would be able to be changed on the fly with this spreadsheet. So I think the balance, even the balances in classes, abilities and stats could be changed on the fly without turning the servers off. That would be definitely a quality of life for the for both the players and the devs.
Yeah, and I mean, again, we're to some extent we're speculating a little bit on what all it might be capable of doing, but that would be a pretty significant shift in how MMOs operate. If that were the case, because you think about it, that's pretty standard in MMOs. We've all, I think, gotten accustomed to having any of these changes. They simply have to wait for the most part until the weekly patch or a monthly patch or whatever comes out, and then you have like a 3-hour period during the week where you have to just sit and wait, and the game doesn't come out, and then you have to download a patch, and then you can finally get in if you're unfortunate enough to be trying to play during that time.
Patch day, no play.
Yeah,
because if there's any issue in the patch, that's delaying the server back up again.
Yeah, it definitely seems there's a lot of fine-tuning they could do in a live environment. Admittedly, they shouldn't have to because it should have all been done in beta, but they can and quickly address things.
Yeah. Well, that's the case. I mean, every game, PvP, PvE, or otherwise, just, they kind of balance it. They release it, and then balancing just happens in perpetuity.
Yeah.
It never stops.
Yeah. In regards to balance, the realm balance,
always find a way to break that.
Yeah. In regards to like population balance too, they were just talking about this last week. Overmind is meant to help control the buffs it gives to the lower pop realms or the buffs it takes away from higher pop realms to balance that out and make things as fair as it can be, number wise.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that we know is that Overmind is vital for the scripting involved in the Dragon's Web and the control of that whole lattice work of connectivity. And so, the Dragon's Web, to introduce it to anyone that may not be familiar with it, that's watching, is a sort of system that have ley lines, which are kind of channels of power that go throughout the land and the different continents and land masses and the keeps and places of power and all these things, and it interconnects them so that things that you do on one area may affect others in ways that we are going to speculate on but don't actually know yet really for sure. But this is also a part of what controls the control of the different land masses of the islands and continents and such. So if this sounds at all familiar, it is likened by the developers themselves as being similar to the network of PlanetSide 2, which I've just pulled up a map here on screen of one of the PlanetSide 2 maps. This is not the best map I could find, but I got it because it highlighted some of these paths. And so this is kind of what I'm thinking the Dragon's Web looks like in a sense. It obviously is probably not going to be displayed on a map in this fashion. But just to kind of visualize the interconnectivity, you can see how there are lines that connect these different objects or bases or locations together. And taking control of one location may affect other locations. It may affect the entire island or the entire continent, and who controls it, and so on and so forth. So, with that kind of thrown out there, I want to talk about what we think. And again, as always, chat, feel free to weigh in. But what do we think this might do? And I have a couple specific options here that I was thinking of and questions. Do you think that the Dragon's Web may prevent keep capture unless circumstances are fit to open it up? For instance, in PlanetSide 2, there are certain bases you cannot capture until you capture other bases around it.
I think it's certainly something it seems that they might be looking towards to prevent backcapping and to force you into certain key areas that are frontline progression from each realm.
Yeah, I mean, they could do something like, if there's two ley lines connected, if your one castle is connected to two other locations or more via ley lines, and those locations have not been captured, you can't capture or attack the one that's in the middle until you take one or two of those other ones around it to open it up.
That's harder to put in place with player-created keeps. So I think that would be possible, like an item to be crafted, to be put in the castle, to connect it to the ley lines, so it's part of the system. But you would need maybe a castle of a certain size, certain amount of cubes to be able to place that.
Small forts might not count.
Yeah, like outposts and things like that might not count. And then otherwise, simply the places of powers on each island with the stabilizers that the factions have put in place. As long as the stabilizers are up, you cannot cap anything in that region of influence of the stabilizer. And you would need first to take the stabilizer before you can start sieging castles and keeps in this region.
Yeah, they could they could also have something that limits the number of keeps that could be tied into the Dragon's Web, either through I would actually, as soon as I started saying it, I also immediately started going, I don't know that I want to see them do that. I think I would much rather see them limit it by like keep size, because we know that your keep size, your plot size is going to be limited to your realm rewards anyway, so you have to be established. You have to be someone with a lot of realm reward points and everything to build a big keep anyway. And I could see that being a big motivation for a guild to get a plot that is big enough to be tied into the Dragon's Web. And then that's going to be pretty limited anyway by that. And then people can throw down little bitty outposts wherever they want. Those don't matter, and they can be destroyed on a daily basis.
Or the enemy could use them as staging points.
Yeah, and that
they can't capture the big ones. They could still use the small outposts as staging points for when they want to at least get a footing to go towards the places of powers and the stabilizers, because otherwise it's like in the real world, you need advanced staging areas to start an invasion or to start a battle. You can't just go through the whole territory. Nobody's going to put their stabilizers at the frontier or on the front lines. It's going to be in safe areas.
Yeah, unless it's required to be a connection point between the next island to pull it.
But otherwise, you might have to go through several largely populated, largely controlled areas, having to go through with your lines of communication and of materials being cut every time. You will need staging places like that. So I think having smaller outposts being able to be taken without the stabilizers being taken first.
One thing that I think would be really interesting is they could make it so that small outposts and stuff can still have like NPC guards, like maybe not many, but a few. And then maybe you can bypass some of them to try to attack other larger outposts and things. But if you do, Overmind tells all those guards of the smaller keeps follow after them, and they all start trailing your group towards the large keep. So then you've got these NPCs following in behind you, and you have to deal with them. You can't just ignore them.
Or they cut your supply line.
Yeah,
Like
or
you-
then you get double teamed. You get to the bigger keep and their NPCs, and then you have the other ones from the smaller ones that have all grouped up and come chasing after you. Now, Oldovik asked when this update came out. I don't think this was the last update. I think maybe the one
They've
before
been
that.
talking about it
Yeah.
a lot each week, but the first time Mark really mentioned it was just after the FSR announcement that happened and everyone was freaking out. So he started giving us a bit more information, and everyone's like, what is that? We've never heard that before.
Yeah. Now, Glackens mentioned the Mile Gates of Daok. I did not play Daok, so I don't know what these are.
If I remember correctly, there were places that you needed to take to open the keeps, the major keeps that had the relics in them. So you had smaller outposts and smaller keeps to take first to open
Okay.
bigger castle and the relics, because the goal to take the realm kinda was to get the relic. That was the major raid boss kinda of PvP of RVR in the AOC. So to open that up, you needed to take other castles around it.
So they're
to make
basically
it
like
memorable.
amp stations and stuff in PlanetSide 2, where you
Yeah.
have certain bases you have to cap in order to go get access to other stations,
Yeah.
other
They,
bases.
they did that with ESO as well. There were, anytime you attacked a keep, there were the 3 outlying like farmlands just around it in like a triangle. You had to take those down to then hit the keep, and that
Oh,
was
you
a
could-
much simpler form of this.
I was going to say, I thought you could skip those, though. It just took longer, or you didn't get as many points or something.
The doors would be harder. The doors and the walls would be harder to take down, and the guard would be more powerful, and they will have more of them.
Yeah.
So if you had a big enough army, you could just skip them.
Which we
But
always did.
it was sometimes better to just take those down first to weaken the castle.
I agree with Vellic, what he mentioned earlier, kind of like not necessarily wanting them to go the route of keeping it so that you have to attack these few places, but at the same time, it acts as a PvP funnel to bring everyone to those locations. And that, for them, for Camelot Unchained, really helps build the idea of what they're trying to sell to us, which is these
Big
bigger
battle.
fights.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking more, I don't want them to limit the amount of keeps that people can build and stuff.
Yeah.
By saying, okay, you can only have X number in this area or something like that. Maybe it just balancing that with just the realm rewards and saying, okay, you have to be a certain level of tier of a guild or whatever to build a keep that's big enough to tie into this. And then the smaller keeps, it don't matter. You know, you can bypass them for the most part. Maybe the NPCs harass people or something, but you know, they're not vital to this lock system. Let's see. Oldovik asked if this would cause islands to be more standardized between game servers. I would say I think it probably will in terms of things like places of power, like which I kind of always assume would be the case. Like they're going to identify what places of power are, and those are going to be on every island. And I imagine the terrain of every island on every server will be, or the islands on each server will be the same. I mean, the map's the map. But then where we put keeps, that's where I definitely do not want them to mess around and give us pre-placed keeps or anything like that. And so I guess
No.
I would actually kind of be very stoked if each game server had its own island uniqueness, different map essentially between the two, because they can do it. They have the tech to procedurally generate it all. That's what they're doing.
maybe the terrain, like they could change, like I guess they could change like some of the, you know, the aesthetics of the islands.
Yeah.
But if they change like the actual like layout of where mountains were and things, I mean that's going to change the actual balance of the game in each island.
Definitely a lot of extra design time in figuring out how this works with what they're trying to do for each instance of that. That's unique.
Yeah, I assume like when it comes to major terrain, like island locate or not island location, but like, you know, the shape of the islands,
Yeah.
overall, and like the mountains and what's passable and what's not. They're going to have that kind of
What's going to be
pre-plotted
really
out.
unique between servers is going to be where the islands are placed, because it's going to depend on which factions take which island. So the maps will be, they might start at the launch being the same on all servers, but they will very quickly change in terms of positioning, in terms of who controls what, where the keeps are. So I don't think the islands being standardized in terms of size or shape will matter very much at some point shortly after launch.
Sorry, I was catching back up on chat there to see if there's anything else we had to address. Yeah, I think it's gonna be interesting to see how they differentiate the map portions. But I do kind of generally assume that like the map is the map. They can procedurally generate the terrain, so maybe they decide they want to vary that up by servers. But I generally assume people aren't switching servers. Obviously, I know that in practice people do, but I assume that's I know that I'm not going to be switching servers just to change my aesthetics, unless I want to play a different realm and just be like, I'm tired of snow. I want to go play on Viking so I can get out of the snow and attack other people's territory.
But changing server to get a new faction will not really impact anything.
No, change the aesthetics of your territory, like the design.
It.
That's what I'm saying. Like if I wanted to change the terrain, I would probably be changing faction onto another server or something. But even then, I'm probably not going to do it. I do still think the priority needs to be having us able to build keeps anywhere we want, or for the most part anywhere we want, which does kind of tie into my next question of. In PlanetSide 2, to some extent, not fully, but to some extent, the map and which bases you have control blocks your progress. Like not just your attacks on which bases you can keep or you can take, but like there are some passageways and things you can't get through at all. Do we think that this system may also block like your physical progress through certain things? Like if this place of power is controlled by the enemy, you can't go through this valley, so on and so forth.
I hope not.
Yeah, I hope not.
Because that is kind of a thing in PlanetSide 2 to some extent. It's not completely, but like at least to like vehicles and stuff, like you can't get them through.
PlanetSide 2 has airships though as well.
Yeah.
So there's ways around that to an extent.
It's true. I tend to agree. I'm not a huge fan of blocking my maneuverability. Like that actually frustrates me in PlanetSide 2 when we're going somewhere and I've got a tank and then I turn down one way and there's a big force field there and I'm like,
there should be a block, but it shouldn't be a physical block. It should be a funnel block that gets you to go somewhere else to do something to then get access to that thing.
It's more, I'd like more an incentive to go somewhere.
Yeah.
Open yourself up than a block.
Oh, can't go this way. Turn around.
Yeah.
That was a waste of 20 minutes of running.
Yeah. Now, one thing that Kriss mentioned earlier that I do absolutely think is going to be a thing. They haven't confirmed it, but I'm like 90% likely this is what Dragon's Web is going to do, is strengthening NPCs and defenses. They even talked about having it affect your defenses of your keeps and stuff, of your flame towers and things of that nature. We know that the ley lines transfer power to some extent. So they're basically like electrical lines that power your defenses and NPCs. I actually kind of think it might be possible that maybe this is a big part of what places of power do. And maybe when you that way they can always have power to your NPCs of some degree when they're connected to the ley lines, and so you can have like a certain amount of NPCs and stuff for a keep of a certain size. But then maybe if you control a place of power in that area as well, all of them are amped up and like really powerful, or you may have double the amount or something. So then that really incentivizes the enemy if they want to take a big keep. They have to go take that place of power before they go there. Otherwise, they know they're going to be dealing with really tough NPCs and stuff.
That definitely seems to be the case, and I think that's why it's called a place of power, because they're powered through the power ley lines. So controlling them or taking control of them does grant either a negative to the people you're attacking, or if you're the guys defending, it starts making you a little more concerned because that's part of the consequence of losing your stuff that they keep talking about.
And that could really, and one thing I like about that is that could really help to branch out into what some other RVR games have failed to do, like TISO. We had the farms and the mines and stuff around the keeps that they tried to incentivize people to cap, but if you had enough people, you just ignored them and said, screw it and attack the keep. But if you're in this game and say places of power do like double the NPC strength of the big keeps in that region, if you control it, and the enemies go and take it, and then they start attacking your keep, they've got to keep people on that place of power. Otherwise, you're going to send a small group in there, recap it, and suddenly buff all your defenses while they're in the middle of sieging you. And so it could kind of force some smaller battles to actually happen. In close proximity.
Mark didn't confirm this with his answer. His answer to what I'm about to say was, quote, basically yes. But IOG asked a very similar question regarding if no one has built a stabilizer, whoever controls the major part of the dragon's web gets the island that they're fighting for. And he says basically yes. And places of power will probably come into that element of if you control more places of power on the island, assuming there's probably more than one, you gain control of the island.
The thing is, what happens to the keeps inside when you gain control of the island?
Indeed.
Because that's the thing.
I do think that there is a difference between controlling a keep and controlling the island. I think that perhaps if you control the island, your keeps might also get a buff of some sort. But I don't think like you're going to lose control of your keeps because an enemy takes the island and then you have keeps on it. That would be crazy if they can just, through magical pressure, just suddenly kick you out of all your keeps.
Yeah.
That would be a little crazy. But
it might lost resources.
But then
it might penalize you.
They don't need to touch the keeps because at the moment you control enough places of power or stabilizers, because we don't know exactly if it's going to be the stabilizers or the places of power that will draw the island towards your territory.
The stabilizers are what's supposed to do that.
Yeah.
But
so if they take those and the island starts going towards the enemy territory, they don't need to really kick you out of the keeps. The enemies will have a shorter trip to attack your keeps than you reinforcing them. So it's kind of de facto giving them an easier time taking your keeps.
Possibly. There's so many other things they could add to it that counter that.
Yeah, it's just my issue with it is if they did make it to where like you get enough pressure on the island from the ley lines and everything from the dragon's web, then it kicks everyone out of the keeps and just claims them. If they did something like that, then it basically becomes like PlanetSide 2, where they go, all right, this continent is open for 1 hour. At the end of the hour, they go, all right, this faction wins, everyone else GTFO. And while that works for PlanetSide, it's pretty fun for forcing people to fight on different servers. They've got 3 different things that they're really dealing with, and they're just trying to force you to go to different areas for.
And it's a much quicker game. You can get in and out of combat so quickly, and you do a lot in a little amount of time.
Maps turn super quickly, so it's very different. There's not the persistence that CU is trying to achieve. The amount of work it will take to make a castle or a big keep or a city, you can't have that being taken within 5 minutes.
Yeah.
No.
You have to have a certain amount of persistence and of continuity for it to be worthwhile. Otherwise, everybody's going to make small outposts that they don't give a crap about losing, and they'll just go fight in the open, and you won't see any siege or anything like that.
One of the things I would really like to see, or what I think I would really like to see out of the Dragon's Web, is several layers of tiered buffs. when it comes to defenses and NPCs and like keep strength and stuff like that. Like if no one controls the island, it's just, or any places of power, it's just straight dead even. You're in an equal fight. If you control a place of power, then a certain distance, like the region that place of power is in, maybe those keeps and stuff have a certain degree of a buff of some sort to strengthen them against assault.
Walls are harder to destroy or something.
If you have enough power and influence to claim that island, maybe there's an additional level of buff. And maybe even if you finally have a stabilizer, it might even add something else on top of that. That then makes it, okay, they really need to hit, because then it again funnels that combat. It goes, okay, they have a stabilizer. We pretty much have to start with the stabilizer. We can optionally go somewhere else, but it's going to be a tough fight. We really need to hit that stabilizer first. All right, we've got the stabilizer. Now everyone else can go, okay, logically they're going to go after a place of power. One of them. We got 2 or 3 of them here. They're going to hit one of them. We got to go to defend those. They can go straight to the keep, but it's going to be a tough fight. So they got to go to the place of power. So we can predict where they're probably going to go, which is the same thing you see in Planet Side, because people go in there and they go, okay, they need to hit this to unlock this passage, or they can go around this way.
Well, but they've hit that base, so they're going towards here.
Yeah, and you can, that's not always correct on what they're going to do. And there is such thing as backcapping and stuff. People can sneak around and do some sneaky stuff, which I do like having the option to do some sneaky stuff in there. But it is nice to have some strategic logic to the battlefield.
Yes.
Yeah. What I would not want to see is just because there is a stealth class, and this is always an issue with stealth involved, that we kind of saw it a little bit in ESO, because everyone could stealth in ESO, is doing a back cap all the way to basically the beginning of the enemy lines and working their way backwards and cutting off everything. For ESO, that cutoff was largely just where you respawn. You couldn't respawn at a keep unless it was connected to your control line. So they created that, making it harder for people to get around. I kind of don't want to see that in this. I want there to be a point at which you can't go beyond maybe a layer in or 2 layers into this island control system.
Well, you can, but you're fighting at a huge disadvantage.
Yeah. Or there's an exponential increase in difficulty the further in you go.
You have no backup. You're isolated, and if you get caught and you get killed, it's a huge penalty. I want to be able to have any option possible, but again, risk versus reward. Choices matter. You decide to go trying to cap the front door of the faction city. You can go try. Good on you if you do it. If not, you're going to go back to your city, and you're losing a lot of things.
And maybe it at least distracts them from the front line, though. Maybe the whole thing's a ploy. You hit their capital city and they freak out. They all call back, and then you go take 2 other keeps while they're trying to figure out what's going on. I like
why I want anything to be possible.
Yeah.
Hard, nearly impossible, but possible.
Well, and I agree with that approach because kind of semi-counter to what Brand said. I agree. I don't want them to always to be one point where they come all the way to our side and they cap it and they cut us off. But it's a web. So the more points we have connected, the harder it is for somebody to do that. And I think that is the approach they should go. So they definitely shouldn't have there's a stabilizer here on our side, and that's where all of our power comes through. And so then if they cap that, it would be awful. Shouldn't do that. But instead have multiple points of contact. But if we invade an island and we neglect the other points, and we just take one and then move in and take one and then move in and take one and keep pushing.
Like a straight line?
Yeah. And then like idiots. And then someone came around and took the first one. Yeah, they cut us off because we were stupid.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't have done that. We overextended ourselves, and they just came around and went, okay. And Go ahead.
Good. I was going to say, I like the idea of if the power, assuming the power comes from the main cities, it starts there and works its way as a web outward. The further out it goes away from the city, the less powerful it is, as it's being drained along the way by everything connected to it. And you have to keep pushing outward.
and that's why you need the places of power as like amplifiers that pushes the realm of influence farther and farther from the main city.
And I think this is where I think the scouts can come in as well, because like I mentioned, if the places of power are amplifiers, and so like you can take a keep while it's got its own place of power, but it's kind of disadvantageous to do so. So they take a place of power before they attack your keep, then they attack your keep. That's one of the things your scouts would be super good at. They can run over there and check, are they guarding the place of power? If not, we can send 5 guys over there to go take it back and recap it.
Oh, yeah.
And so that makes the scouts much more useful because they can really keep tabs on these kind of ancillary sites and seeing, okay, what are they doing besides just in the main assault?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
Go
ahead.
I mean, on that note with scouts, it would kind of be interesting. It probably won't happen. That they have the ability to kind of see, to an extent, how the ley lines are affecting things, and can, through the process of updating maps and stuff, kind of point out. Especially, we know stabilizers are supposed to be player-made structures. They're not pre-built structures, and if they get to be placed anywhere on the island, they can look kind of like anything. How do we as the players know, oh, that's a stabilizer? Maybe the scouts come in involved, understanding certain things that power the stabilizer. They can have an element of seeing that and reporting that.
Yeah. And that could actually be maybe even on top of that, if maybe if the Dragon's Web is changeable, because player-made structures can be put in different places, so perhaps you actually need scouts to see the Dragon's Web in the first place, to see where these different connective points are, and see, okay, maybe this one keep is kind of in between 2 places of power. Which one's powering it? Is somehow both of them powering it? Maybe you need a scout to actually go suss that out and see, okay, which place of power do we need to take, or what benefits is it getting? Maybe it's getting different benefits from each one, and you want to see which one you want to take out.
That adds a lot more complexity to strategy.
Let's see, Grimslag was saying, perhaps the magic of resurrection doesn't flow past a magic stabilizer. You must put in the keep behind your advance. That's actually something we talked about a little bit in our last topic about resurrection, and it is still something that I really hope is the case, is that that resurrection is tied to like big keeps at the least. Like you have to have a certain building or something that is powered by the Dragon's Web, perhaps, okay, this is now a resurrection spot because it is attached to the Dragon's Web and it is powered and yada, yada, yada.
Just letting you know now, that's not going to be the case. It can certainly be a thing they add to it. But I'm confirming 100% the Devout are getting resurrection.
Well, I know the Devout are getting resurrection. I'm still hoping that it's only for testing.
100%, my bet it's not.
Because I'm still going to be kind of ticked off if they end up adding just Battlefield Resurrection to this game straight up.
Yeah, no,
I can understand doing it for testing because you've got to have something, but
that would be dumb of them because that would break the idea of the game they want to make.
It really just depends on how they do it. There are ways it works fine. There are ways it works horrible, and it comes down to choosing the right way. So.
Yeah.
Which they've never been willing to give us any details whatsoever on how they want to use it, and how they intend to use it. Which to this day is still like the one thing that worries me the most. We're not even talking about resurrection. That's got to be horse crap. I mean, you can't
add fuel to that fire.
Discussed about it
when they do the Devout presentation. There sounds like they're not including the resurrection runes as part of the presentation.
Of course not. Why would they?
Yeah.
Still going to ask about it.
And they still will ignore your question.
I'll start asking about it in Discord and on the forums. Yeah. I can be right annoying. So, I do have other questions and things here discussing the Dragon's Web.
What's at the center?
I mentioned that that they were, we already mentioned that they were, it was going to, the Dragon's Web was going to determine island control, sans having a stabilizer. So if you don't have a stabilizer, that determines who controls what.
Correct.
Do you think that the stabilizer, and this kind of goes back again to my idea of maybe having multiple tiers of buffs depending on how you control the island, how much you control it. Do you think that the stabilizer might be like a faction built version of a place of power almost? In that
Possible.
fashion.
It's possible. With just obviously unique characteristics, because otherwise a regular place of power could draw islands to you. I'm really interested to see how they come up with deciding how a player built structure interacts with all this.
Yeah. I was just thinking in terms of maybe like a stabilizer, maybe like a place like we're suggesting for a place of power. Maybe it also boosts your ley lines throughout that whole region, and so that's how it connects to the other layer. It actually not only strengthens your ley lines throughout this entire island, but then out to the next islands to start the connections there.
I think that's absolutely how it should be. If it's not,
Yes.
that by connecting to the next island, the next tier in, it boosts the current tier you're in, and then that energy starts fueling further inward.
So then it theoretically, again, makes the island even more difficult to cap, even if it's only through just powering buildings and upgrades and stuff for the keeps.
Right.
Kind of makes it more challenging for someone to just push in unless they deal with the stabilizer.
Kind of on that note, and a side note of that note is, we talk about power. Power is typically considered a limited resource. Do you think that these ley lines, as they come through each territory, have a finite amount of power within each territory that you can only use so much of it before you have to try to further connect in to gain more, or to connect something else to gain more?
I think they probably do. Like, there's only going to be so much power you can have over an island, as well as like the places of power can perhaps add on to that. But a related question that I had was, do you think that big keeps, like big large keeps and castles and things, might act as sources of power of their own? So maybe building a big keep of a certain tier might actually provide power in a limited radius to smaller forts and keeps around it.
Make it a stabilizer itself.
Kind of, in a way, like it's only like a mini node within the Dragon's Web, so it's not only getting power from the Dragon's Web, but then it's maybe allowing certain upgrades for smaller forts around it, kind of incentivizing people to then build smaller keeps within the area of like the big cities and stuff.
That would be possible.
I would say that maybe it could send that power out that it's getting to the smaller keeps and acts as the the lightning rod to all these other things, but doesn't generate power. If anything, I think it might consume power to build within the ley lines and utilize it.
Because I will say my concern is if it doesn't like generate any power of its own, then they are determining that there is a limit to how many forces a realm can focus on a single island. They're saying this much and no more.
Yeah.
Now, theoretically, you can build keeps,
power,
but they get no power because there's a limited amount of power there, unless they determine that the amount of Dragon's Web power is unlimited. But I would think from a balance standpoint, they would want to say, all right, an island, if you connect everything, can only have up to 100 power to power keeps and stuff. To try and limit that. So you can't have too many huge keeps on one island. Which is why I kind of like the idea that maybe a bigger keep can give a little bit of power to smaller keeps around it, because then that kind of softens, I guess, that cap for me. I mean, I guess it would depend on how they did it, because even talk about it, I'm thinking like, okay, maybe it provides a little bit of power in that. If you build a smaller fort or something near it, maybe you can have X number of NPCs. You can have like a guard tower and like 5 or 6 or 10 NPCs or something in that little keep, and that's it. Because you built near it. Now, if you build further away, you get nothing. You just have walls. I don't know. I do have some concern. Like I said, I agree. They're probably going to have to cap off like how much power can go to an island in some degree, but I am concerned about like them deciding like a hard cap of some sort to that because. Again, I like the realms to be able to determine how they're going to play, and if they want to load down on one island, why are you going to stop them from loading down on that one island and say, no one is taking this island from us in ours?
I mean, they could do that and still have all the player structures that they want there, especially if they don't consume any of that power, but maybe the buffs that you can choose by having a bigger castle that then gets spread out to smaller tertiary structures does consume power, and you can choose, okay, I want this buff, it costs this much power. I want this buff, it costs this much power. And it slowly takes away from the total territory power.
What's stopping a guild that has a castle like that from hogging all the power
on just the territory? Not through the whole realm, but just that island in particular.
Yeah, but same. That's the same problem. A guild that builds a big keep is the first to build it, can hog all the power of the place of power. And then all the other,
if that's the true
support them then.
Yeah, that's true, period, no matter what. As long as there was a cap or number to leyline power, it's true no matter what. So.
Well, it's if, as I said, like the bigger keeps provide essentially kind of a little bit of free power to keeps and stuff around them, then that's not necessarily the case. Like they can't hog it because they can't use it. It's just free to people who build around them within their area of influence.
But is that power infinite?
That's where like I would actually think maybe something like that would be infinite but limited. So like each keep can only get like 2 points of power, but as many little keeps as you want to throw out there, sure, they all get it, and that just gives them like a guard tower or something.
Certainly provides a funnel point for PvP to try to take that bigger keep out.
True.
Yeah, and those then become like a buffer to the big keep because you encourage people to build all these little keeps and stuff around it. They have to go through those, so they have to go in and take them. They can go around them, but it just makes like kind of a buffer layer to kind of help slow things down.
I can just see people building layers of walls that lead out and out and out. Just you get one wall at a time. You just got to take them down.
I do fully think that they're going to put padding. For some reason, I can only think of web design right now. They're going to put padding around their around territories, so there will be areas you cannot build keeps in.
I was like, padding? What are you talking about? Oh, I get it.
They're going to build a buffer zone around. I guarantee there's going to be a certain degree of distance between each keep that cannot be built in to allow growth and to allow
that. If you start putting buffers, how do you design them so that players can still build a full-on city?
Well, that's why especially I think, they'll have to say, okay, what's the biggest size of like a city? And then they'll go, okay, we can build this, and then that's the territory of a plot. Now, they may not have the ability to build that much yet, but that's how much, when you claim a plot, you claim that much territory, and then there's a little bit added on top of that no one can build outside of. Say it's 30 blocks or whatever that, you have to go out that no one can build in. And then... So that way it forces keeps and stuff to space out a good distance. You can still build wherever you want, but you can't build within a certain distance of each other.
So you would have keep social distancing.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Well, because otherwise people are going to block passage, and they've already said they're not going to allow that.
Or like have 6 layers of walls.
Yeah. So. They've got to have them far enough away so people can walk between them and traverse, and they've got to allow for city growth.
Yes, because
unless they want to predetermine where those cities are going to go, which I really don't want them to do. So
I really don't want that. I believe they were talking about players. For a guild, the number of players gives you can donate your cube allocation towards the building of a city. That basically the limit was not in placement in the world, but of the cube allocation per player that you can build. So one player has enough cube allocation to make a house, for example. But you need several players pulling together to make a keep, and even more so players pulling their allowance basically together to make a city and etc.
I could see
an interesting way of limiting where keeps and stuff are placed, because you need a certain amount of players to make a keep of a decent size.
I could see if even though they can procedurally generate their terrain, if they take a still more fine-tuned approach after that fact, and for game design purposes, this mountain here, does it make sense? What does it do on this island? And where they place their ley lines, they could use the ley lines themselves as determining how big of a structure you could place. And if it's closer to a ley line, it is a bigger plot of land.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be one way that they exercise a limited degree of control over player buildings by saying that you can build anywhere, but if you want to build a big keep that's potentially powered by the ley lines and everything, you have to build on a ley line.
Yeah.
And if you don't get power.
But how do you know where the ley lines are?
Scouts. No, who knows? But
maybe you have a map in the realm.
Yeah, it's possible everyone can see where exactly they are.
Yeah.
No, but like the realm city, like in the King's Keep, there's a map of the ley lines,
like a magical 3D map that's showing all the lines,
and that you can't take it out with you. It's there. You have maybe the scouts can draw a copy of it or something, a rough copy of it, so you know where more or less they're placed.
Yeah, I mentioned that as a possibility, but I honestly prefer more the idea that you can build a keep of a certain tier, and then it basically becomes a node in the Dragon's Web. So even if you're not on a ley line, like ley lines connect to it anyway. They create new ley lines that connect to it.
You attract power.
Yeah.
Just because then it makes the web more complex and growing and changing, and something that's driven by the players, rather than having the devs just go, no, this is what the Dragon's Web map is because we said so. And it's kind of like, I think it was Grimslag that mentioned earlier, might have been someone else, but I think it was Grimslag that mentioned earlier about wanting the map of every server to be different. And maybe the terrain map can't be that different, but the Dragon's Web potentially could be.
Yeah.
And it will be if it's all player generated, with the exception. I mean, even the places of power, going back to Overmind can control. I think initially, a long time ago, we thought that they would despawn at some point, that the places of power were not a permanent location.
I do have a vague recollection of that supposed to be a thing.
We talked about it a long time ago. If it's not or if it is a thing where they're not entirely permanent, or if they can get destroyed and they pop back up naturally, Overmind can control where they spawn, and they don't have to be spawned in the same place.
Yeah, and how this affects the ley lines and the Dragon's Web when they respawn, because it reshapes the whole ley lines.
And that would make it more dynamic.
Yep.
So my last, actually I have two more questions here, but
let's do it.
The kind of wrap up question here is are there any other things that you think the Dragon's Web might do?
Yes. To an extent, yes. Looking at the lore of the world, this used to be a completed island, a completed continent that was destroyed, sundered, a long time ago. And while we've been waiting for this game to come out for so long, I think a lot of people have stopped realizing or remembering that there's a point to getting to the center, which supposedly is Camelot, the true city, and how the ley lines and powering the islands to come together powers Camelot back up, I guess, like it's a
The rejoining.
Yeah, the rejoining of Camelot and what that means for an almost endgame type PvP situation, and whether that's how you control it as a faction or how it just comes up to begin with, is even with all the factions fighting together, slowly working their way to the middle, creating Camelot in this final PvP zone.
Well, in a similar vein, do you still think that islands are going to get pulled back towards your territory, or that all your islands, as you connect them, are going to get pulled in towards the middle?
I hope it's the second of those.
I've been, originally they
it's a
kind of
mix
mentioned
of
like
the
you're
two.
pulling islands towards yourself, but I'm like, but if you're reconnecting the continent, wouldn't you be pulling yourself in towards there? And then that means the faction that's winning the most actually gets pulled more into the RVR, and it becomes harder for them to capture anything else because all their stuff is getting pulled closer to everybody.
Could be. I think it should.
I think
If there's a true middle, everyone should be being pulled into the middle.
Yeah.
I would like a mix of both, actually. Like when you start, the outer islands would be pulled towards your city, your realm city, your main island. But the closer you get to Camelot, and the more those pull this island, so your realm city island, towards Camelot. So it would be like the outside is coming in on your island, and then the closer you get to the center, the more you pull yourself there.
So my last question here, it's kind of a soft question a little bit, but also kind of not. They did mention that, the Dragon's Web and Overmind, that in some ways these things have to do, this was really more of an Overmind question, I guess, but that it has to do with actively monitoring the population of servers and affecting the changes that try to cope with population imbalance. How do you think that's also tied into the Dragon Web?
Yes.
And how do you think that's going to be used to affect balance?
I think that it will look at not only the frequency of how much a faction controls of the Dragon's Web, but also look at how many people are on for each faction, and decide based off of that how much it needs to boost the other factions, if at all, to give them a chance to do something. And it will affect players and NPCs and structures and add buffs and bonuses, while giving none to the overpopulated.
But hasn't that always been kind of their argument, that they don't want to give raw bonuses and buffs to realms based on population, that they wanted to give other benefits instead, rather than just having the standard, plus 2% damage to the smaller faction so that they conquer everyone else?
I don't know what the specific thing they're giving is, but I know last week that question came up and Mark talked about giving buffs to the imbalanced factions.
Well, yeah, but, they always conceptualize those as like crafting buffs and things, like the
could be buff to the NPCs guarding the keeps, for example.
He mentioned players as well at some point. Okay. So now, again, we don't know what they're doing, but
yeah, we don't know that they've. We can't exactly say they've never reneged on something like that. And
yeah.
Oh, that thing we mentioned 5 years ago. Yeah.
Well, it turns out it wasn't going to work. So
yeah. Well, like they seem to kind of MJ seemed to kind of say on the last wrap up that body part targeting is no longer a thing and is probably not going to be a thing, and that has never been really announced. That's just okay. I was like, okay, it's not. All right.
Many months ago that was scrapped, and it was just never officially announced. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Because there's a difference between not using it anymore and not developing it anymore. And so he said he would still like it to be a thing, but it sounded very much like he's going, we're not working on that at all anymore. And
the testers shot 1,000 arrows at it and said no.
But one of the things I was thinking of is, trying to think of buffs and things that they could do with relation to the Dragon's Web to try to counter this realm imbalance question for population. And especially the idea that, they want to make it so that it's fun to be on the smaller realm. There's advantages to it, but it's not then not fun for everyone else because the other realm just does more damage and kills you no matter what. One of the things I was thinking of is, since they brought the Dragon's Web in there, maybe one of the things they could do is, if you're in the smaller population faction, maybe there's time involved in the spread of the ley line power and how powerful it is, and maybe the smaller faction gets more Dragon's Web power and gets it faster. So when they take a keep, it spreads more quickly than it does for other realms. So then, because I was thinking that could help to kind of drive up the excitement a little bit and the enjoyment of going, oh, well, we don't have to wait as long when we cap something before the Dragon's Web updates, or we get like a spread of power to different outlying areas and stuff. And so that's still kind of like, getting buffs without having to like directly buff the players.
It's hard not to directly buff the players when you're looking at population specifically, even not just realm power balance, but population numbers are always a thing that come into play. And it's hard to go up against, even if you're skilled. If you only have 20 people against 100 people, it becomes harder to do anything.
I agree. I'm just going by what they said. They
Absolutely.
said we're not trying to directly buff people to balance population.
You can certainly do offensive speed bonuses to building things and to getting yourself reestablished on these islands. It might be cool to do a more of not a defensive, but an offensive against the enemy faction who has the extra power. We know they've started working on wyverns as models and getting them into the game, and veil storms. These things could be attracted to the overflowing amount of power that is owned by the faction, and a veil storm might be more likely to take place in a realm that has an abundance of power.
And MJ did very much make a comment, I think in this last wrap up, but it might have been another one, that, for instance, because of things like veil storms, turtling up in like a keep is not necessarily going to be a wise strategic choice. The weather and everything may turn against you if you're just sitting there kind of hoarding your position.
All the magic effects in a small area, which they've always said was the best way, the surest way to trigger a veil storm.
Yeah. And I agree, Oldovic. I really hate it when games have to resort to just direct statistical buffs onto characters to try to balance out the realms. Because it does. You get into those one-on-one fights, and then even if you're on the smaller realm, which we often try to even be on like the minority realm a little bit, and to kind of have the uphill fight, but then you go kill somebody, and you're like, oh well, I mean, I have like a 5% damage buff, so. Of course I killed him.
You don't feel any accomplishment killing somebody when you have the buff on.
Yeah, I don't really get a lot of excitement from getting like a damage buff or something and going and fighting people. It's kind of... It's always felt like a very lackluster... Now, in some cases, it's kind of necessary. I do agree. And I will even admit that I think to some degree, a certain amount of it is necessary depending on the level of imbalance. If there's extreme imbalance, it gets to a certain point where there's nothing you can do except maybe give a damage buff to the smaller faction.
If a server is that imbalanced, they really should look at combining two servers.
Yeah.
But I do think a lot of things they can connect with this leyline system and power, and especially with Overmind and control the balancing numbers of that, and the things we already know about. The veil storms, I think, would be awesome if they happen more frequently, if you owned all that shit. And it makes sense. All that extra energy.
More and bigger ones also. That might actually damage your keeps and be a drain on your resources and things like that.
Or, the more power you have, the more you have, the more you stand to lose if you lose it. Talking about that consequence to losing things that MJ talks about. If you have all this stuff, maybe you lose more of it, being the overpowered balance if you lose it.
And maybe that's even part of the purpose of like the stabilizers, because they are called stabilizers. When they're originally intended to stabilize like the continents and pull them together, but what if it is like it is the linchpin that finishes an island and goes, we own this island. Not only do we own it, but we have built the stabilizer and it is ours.
It's your flag.
And when you it's your flag. And when you do that, the island like calms down. Like maybe all the progress towards that, capturing all these things, just make veil storms and stuff a little bit more likely to happen on your areas, and it keeps building until you do build the stabilizer, and then it kind of calms things down and goes, okay, until the fighting starts again, this is ours. It's done. The weather's calmed down a bit and kind of secures the whole thing.
So they retake the stabilizer or destroy it, and suddenly veil storms start popping back up there more frequently, and it becomes hard for them to control and
that kind of helps them take some keeps initially too, because veil storms might start to hit some of your areas and weaken them again. And you've got to either go in there and shore stuff up, or the more the fighting starts, the more the veil storms and everything are going to start happening, and till it reaches a certain level of equilibrium within the continent again. And so it kind of makes it difficult to really lock down and hold something.
Yeah,
definitely can see that being a thing.
That would be interesting. Like being a decent strategy to just hit the stabilizer regularly to keep their power in check. You might not have, especially for smaller guilds that don't always have the manpower to take a keep. Attacking stabilizers instead might be a good way to contribute to your realm, because you're weakening the other realm by creating more chaos on their territory.
And there's also, within these things, there's also to be kept in mind are the mines and resources and things throughout this whole area that may not be tied into the Dragon's Web, but those are also going to be kind of not necessarily capture points, but places of interest that may be capture points because people may have built keeps on them, but they're going to be areas that people want to come in and kind of divert and take over. And so small groups can also go around and do that. Even if an area is captured by the enemy, they can still go in and kill all their people that are trying to gather things and cause some issues.
One thing we haven't talked about that might be also interesting to investigate is the relationship between the ley lines and the Dragon's Web and the depths.
That is something that I'd considered a little bit, though we don't know anything about how they might work.
We probably don't know anything about the depths.
Yeah.
I mean, Overmind controls that too. So
yeah.
But that is something like I have kind of wondered if the Dragon's Web may have something to do with the depths. I briefly considered it when we were talking about like blocking passage. Like, what if instead of blocking passage, they had an entry to the depths open up somewhere where they don't want people to necessarily navigate through because of the web or whatever. So you still have somewhere you can go. It just might not be the place you want to go. But then I was like, I don't know that they would do that. But maybe there are ways that the Dragon's Web somehow ties into where those depths openings, show up.
Yeah,
for sure.
Don't know what that would be, but how long do you think it'll be before we start testing things like this in game?
Overmind stuff, possibly the end of this month for alpha testers with the new scenario, but mostly just Overmind stuff.
Yeah.
I was thinking I could see Dragon's Web absolutely being a part of the next 90 days, not sprint, but the next 90-day pack.
The next 90, yeah.
Because now they've got this scenario coming out at some point in the future of which has a keep, has a places of power and everything for us to kind of do some siege stuff. So in the next 90 days after this period, I could absolutely see them going, okay, now you have this. Now you can't capture the keep or something until you take the place of power or do something to connect the Dragon's Web.
Yeah.
Or
let's add a second island or two or more islands and maybe build out slowly all the islands that we will eventually have. Hopefully not slowly, but
maybe. All right.
But yeah.
Is there anything else about Dragon's Web or Overmind.
I hope dragons, like real dragons, are connected to it somehow.
Yes.
I mean, that is a good point. It is called the Dragon's Web.
I do hope there's a dragon in the center of it.
I have a feeling that's just a naming convention, but you know.
It's probably, you get to Camelot, you unlock it, suddenly dragons fly out of it, unlocked now as well, and start terrorizing the world.
Maybe the dragons are living in Camelot.
But no, there's a lot about both features that are still unknown, and be nice to know it. Won't for a while.
Yeah, we know next to nothing about dragons or even the Sturm, so or Strim or whatever you want to call them.
MJ is making more announcements on the forums throughout the days and the weeks. He has update sections that just on a whim. He'll be like, I did this today, or we're working on this week, instead of waiting to that last day of the month to announce us with the larger bulk of things, which is nice. And so we can get a little bit from that.
Get some dragon spiders in the game, and Kriss will just G-quit.
Done.
Nope, not playing it. We're done.
Get the mod squad to do something about that.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming out. It was a good episode. We've got we will have another one in 1 month, first Sunday of next month. We don't really have a topic yet, but I'm sure something will come to us. We have a list to pick from.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming out, and we'll see you around.
Later.